Hi, my name is Amanda Ansel, and I am an English education student at Colorado State University. I created this lesson plan entitled Heroic Poetry. This lesson covers the following CDE standards. Stylistic devices and descriptive details in literary and narrative texts are organized for a variety of audiences and purposes and evaluated for quality. Using feedback to evaluate and revise presentation. And the following net standard. Rehearse the presentation to gain fluency, to adjust tone, and modulate volume for emphasis and develop poise. The inquiry questions for this lesson are: why is visual imagery a skill that the author uses to create tone? And how does using poetic techniques aid understanding in poetry? Through this multi-day lesson, students should understand poetic techniques and how to apply them in a way that makes sense in the genre and format. Every student will be able to write using poetic techniques such as alliteration and onomatopoeia, figurative language such as simile and metaphors, and graphic elements such as capital letters, line length, word position for intended effect with evidence outcomes. For the evidence outcomes for this lesson, I will be able to see how students have used poetic techniques used in the poem I have assigned in order to assess their understanding of poetic techniques, figurative language, and graphic elements for intended effects. To begin this lesson, I will use music to introduce the ideas of poetry. I will play a top 40 song that students know, such as Roar by Katy Perry or Something by Macklemore. I will provide a printout of the lyrics, and you'll watch a YouTube video of the music video to increase their understanding. Next, I will give students a worksheet that has directions for the hero poem on it. I will first show an example poem to show students what I am expecting. They will be given the whole class period to work on their poems. This will be a rough draft of their work. This slide shows an example worksheet of what I want them to look at. And this slide shows an example of the type of poem I am looking for with my example. After class, the check for understanding will be looking at students' rough drafts of their poems in order to see if students understand how to apply their knowledge of poetic techniques and poetic form and that they were used in the correct way. First, I will establish students' knowledge base by asking them to identify figurative language and poetry techniques. Then I will gauge comprehension by asking students to write the definitions and write their own example sentence for each. After, I will have students apply their knowledge by writing a practice poem using their favorite poetry technique throughout the poem. For example, a student would write a poem with alliteration throughout. Next, students will compare and contrast the different genres for poetry and explain how they are different, i.e. haiku versus sonnet. Then, students will write their own poem with the theme of heroism. They will write multiple genre poems all about heroism. Finally, students will present their favorite poem that they have written throughout the unit and defend why it is the best one they've written. After students have finished their poems and talked about their heroes, we will close this poetry lesson by having the students present their poems and share them with the class. We will look at a few standout poems so that students can see good examples of poetic techniques and elements. The presentation will be the last thing we do within writing poetry, but we will spend the rest of the year practicing identifying poetry. By having a final copy of the poem students have written, I can easily assess how students have understood the lesson by seeing how they apply their knowledge of poetic elements in their poems about their heroes. If they can use poetic elements in an obvious, well-done way, I can see that they have fully understood the lesson presented to them.